What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, someone from the year 2157 could be sitting next to you on the bus? What if time travel isn't just science fiction, but a reality that's been hidden from us? Tonight, we're diving into 15 of the most shocking, most disturbing, and most credible stories of time travelers that have ever been documented. And I'm warning you right now, story number 7 will change everything you thought you knew about reality. But before we begin, may I ask where you're listening from this evening? Make sure you hit that subscribe. We upload mind-bending content like this every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's dive into our first story, and this one takes place in a small town in Nebraska. In October 2019, police in Lincoln, Nebraska received a call about a man acting erratically in a parking lot. When officers arrived, they found 38-year-old William Taylor standing completely still, staring at his hands with tears streaming down his face. But what he told officers next would become one of the most documented cases in modern police records. Taylor claimed he wasn't from 2019 at all. He insisted he was from the year 2047 and he had traveled back in time to warn humanity about something catastrophic. The officers, thinking he was intoxicated or mentally unwell, began standard protocol. Taylor described technology that didn't exist yet. He talked about neural implants that would become mandatory by 2031. He mentioned a global currency collapse in 2029. He even described specific weather patterns and natural disasters that would occur in the following years. The officers documented everything and took him to a medical facility for evaluation. Here's where it gets really strange. Taylor had no identification, no social security number, and no birth certificate. When they ran his fingerprints, nothing came up. It was as if he didn't exist. But the most disturbing part? Taylor had a small device embedded under the skin of his forearm. When doctors examined it, they found technology that was decades beyond anything currently available. The materials used in the device couldn't be identified with standard laboratory equipment. Taylor spent 3 days in custody before he simply vanished. Security footage shows him in his holding cell one moment, and in the next frame, he's gone. No doors opened. No one entered or left. He simply disappeared. The police department sealed the case, but leaked reports show that Taylor made several specific predictions before he vanished. 3 of those predictions have already come true. The others are scheduled for the years 2026 through 2029. Now, this is just the beginning. But wait until you hear about story number 4, where a woman appeared with photographs from 80 years in the future. But first, story 2, the TikToker. From 2714. In early 2021, a TikTok account exploded onto the scene with a claim that seemed absolutely insane. A user going by the name Javier claimed he was trapped in the year 2027, in a version of Earth where all humans had vanished. Now, you might be thinking, oh, just another internet hoax. But here's where it gets unsettling. Javier posted videos of completely empty cities. We're talking about major urban areas with not a single person, not a single car moving, not a single sign of life. He walked through hospitals, shopping malls, and airports, all completely abandoned but with lights still on, electronics still running. The video showed modern technology and locations that matched our current timeline, but something was fundamentally different. The dates on newspapers, the calendars on walls, the digital displays, all showed dates from 2027. Skeptics immediately claimed it was CGI or filmed during early morning hours, but video analysts noticed something disturbing. The shadows in his videos were consistent with the times he claimed to be filming. The positions of the sun, the way light reflected off buildings, everything checked out for the dates and times he provided. What really sent chills down people's spines was when Javier started posting videos from locations that viewers requested. Someone would comment, "Go to Times Square," and within hours, he'd post a video of Times Square completely empty, matching the weather conditions for that exact day in the future. Then Javier made a chilling claim. He said that on February 13, 2027, something called the event would occur. He couldn't or wouldn't explain what it was, but he insisted that humanity had 6 years to prepare. The account posted regularly for 3 months, then suddenly went silent. When people tried to access the old videos, they found that many had been deleted or removed. Some viewers had downloaded the videos and still share them on conspiracy forums today. But here's the most disturbing part. Javier described a pandemic that would return in 2026, more severe than what we experienced in 2020. He described specific mutations and variants by name, months before health organizations began using those exact same naming conventions. Was Javier really from 2027? The truth is, we still don't know. But what we do know is that some of his predictions about events in 2022 and 2023 came true with unsettling accuracy. Keep watching because story number 9 involves a man who brought back technology from the year 3000, and the government confiscated it within 24 hours. Story 3, the pilot who landed in the wrong year. On September 9, 1954, a plane landed at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. This wasn't unusual, except for the fact that this particular plane and its pilot should not have existed. The pilot, who identified himself as Captain Rodriguez, presented his passport and flight credentials to customs officers. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but then officials noticed something impossible. His passport was from a country called Toward. Here's the problem. No country called Toward exists. It never has. When confronted, Captain Rodriguez became confused and agitated. He insisted Toward was a European country that had existed for over 1,000 years. He even pointed to its location on a map, right where Andorra sits between France and Spain. But he had never heard of Andorra. The officials examined his passport more closely. It looked authentic, with stamps from multiple countries including Japan, showing he'd been traveling internationally for years. His driver's license and other documentation all confirmed his identity as a citizen of Toward. They checked with the company he claimed to work for. The company existed, but they had no record of anyone named Rodriguez. They called the hotel where he said he had a reservation. The hotel existed, and yes, there was a reservation under his name, but when they checked, the record showed he'd been staying there for the past 3 years during his regular trips to Tokyo. Authorities decided to detain Captain Rodriguez overnight while they investigated. They confiscated all his documents and placed him in a room at the airport hotel with guards stationed at the door. The next morning, when officials went to question him further, Captain Rodriguez was gone. The room was locked from the inside. The guards swore no one had entered or left. All of his documents, which had been stored in a secure location, had also vanished. It was as if Captain Rodriguez and everything proving his existence had simply been erased from reality. Skeptics argue this story is an urban legend, but Japanese airport records from 1954 show a incident involving an unidentified passenger with irregular documentation that resulted in a full security review. The official records remain sealed. Was Captain Rodriguez a time traveler who accidentally slipped into the wrong timeline? Or was he from a parallel dimension where Toward existed? Either way, he vanished as mysteriously as he appeared, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense that reality is far more fluid than we'd like to believe. Story 4, The Woman with Photographs. From 2098. In March 2018, a woman walked into a police station in Miami, Florida, carrying a leather satchel and claiming she needed to speak with someone immediately about temporal displacement. The officers, accustomed to dealing with unusual characters, were about to dismiss her when she opened her bag. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. But these weren't ordinary photographs. The woman, who refused to give her real name and asked to be called Maya, spread the photos across the desk. They showed futuristic cityscapes with architecture that seemed both advanced and hauntingly beautiful. Buildings that spiraled into the sky with organic, flowing designs. Transportation systems that appeared to move through transparent tubes suspended in the air. And people dressed in clothing that looked both familiar and alien. But here's what made officers stop and actually pay attention. The photos were printed on a material that no one could identify. It wasn't paper, it wasn't plastic. It felt almost like fabric but had the clarity of a high-definition screen. When you moved the photos, the images seemed to have depth, as if they were three-dimensional. Maya claimed these photos were from the year 2098. She said she had been part of a temporal research program and had become unstuck in time, finding herself in 2018 with no way to return to her original timeline. The police called in specialists from the University of Miami to examine the photographs. The material analysis came back with results that baffled everyone. The substrate contained polymers that didn't match anything in existing databases. The image quality suggested technology far beyond current printing capabilities. Even more disturbing were the locations in the photos. Maya could identify each one. Miami Beach, downtown Manhattan, Los Angeles. But they were transformed in ways that seemed to follow logical urban development patterns. Experts in urban planning who examined the photos noted that the designs actually solved many current infrastructure problems in ways that made theoretical sense. Maya spent 6 hours being interviewed, documented, and tested. She described a future where climate change had forced massive engineering projects. She talked about the water wars of 2067. She mentioned technological developments that seemed fantastical: consciousness uploading, biological computers, weather control systems. Then she made a prediction. She said that, in November 2018, a specific tech company would announce a breakthrough in quantum computing that would change everything. She even described the exact type of breakthrough, using technical terms that the interviewing officers didn't understand. They documented everything, took copies of the photographs, and prepared to hold her for further evaluation. But that night, Maya complained of feeling ill. They took her to the medical facility, and while doctors were examining her, she had what appeared to be a seizure. When they stabilized her, Maya opened her eyes with a look of complete confusion. She had no memory of who she was, where she came from, or why she was there. The name Maya meant nothing to her. She couldn't explain the photographs. Psychiatric evaluation suggested genuine amnesia. They kept her for 3 weeks, but she never recovered her memories. Eventually, she was released into the care of social services, where she started a new life with a new identity. The photographs were kept as evidence, but here's the truly disturbing part. In November 2018, exactly as Maya had predicted, IBM announced a major breakthrough in quantum computing, the exact breakthrough she had described in technical detail 6 months earlier. Coincidence? Maybe. But those photographs are still stored in an evidence locker in Miami, and no one has been able to explain their origin or the technology used to create them. Story 5. The Montauk Project Survivor. If you've heard of the Montauk Project, you know it's one of the most controversial alleged government experiments in history. But what if I told you that someone who claims to have been part of it is still alive and telling their story? Alfred Bielek claimed that in the 1980s, he was involved in a secret government project at Camp Hero in Montauk, New York. According to Bielek, this wasn't just any research facility, it was a time travel experimentation center. Bielek's story is complex and disturbing. He claimed that he and his brother jumped from the USS Eldridge in 1943 during the famous Philadelphia experiment and landed in 1983 at Montauk. From there, he became involved in experiments that involved sending people forward and backward through time. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction. But here's what makes Bielek's story compelling: the details. He described specific technology that shouldn't have been known in the 1980s. He talked about the use of electromagnetic fields to create temporal rifts. He discussed concepts in quantum mechanics that weren't mainstream science until decades later. Bielek claimed that during these experiments, he traveled to the year 6037. He described a future where humanity had evolved beyond recognition, where cities existed in harmony with nature, and where the concepts of war and conflict had been completely eliminated. But he also described darker timelines, futures where humanity had destroyed itself, where Earth was barely habitable, where the survivors lived in underground bunkers and fought over the last remaining resources. The most disturbing part of Bielek's testimony was his claim that the government had successfully created stable time travel technology but kept it secret because of the potential for abuse. He said there were time police, who monitored the timeline and corrected anomalies, basically people whose job was to fix paradoxes and prevent unauthorized time travel. Skeptics point out that Bielek's story has inconsistencies and that there's no verifiable evidence to support his claims. However, some of the technology he described in interviews in the 1990s didn't exist publicly until years later. Bielek also made several predictions about future events. While many didn't come true, some were eerily accurate. He predicted major shifts in Earth's magnetic field, specific natural disasters, and technological breakthroughs, several of which occurred within years of his predictions. Before his death in 2011, Bielek maintained that his story was true. He claimed that his memories had been suppressed through government programming, but had gradually returned over the years. True or not, the Montauk Project has become legendary in conspiracy circles. And if even a fraction of what Bielek claimed is true, it means time travel isn't something that might happen in the future. It's something that's already been happening for decades. Story 6. The Russian Cosmonauts. Who gained time? Here's something most people don't know. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time travel to the future is not only possible, it's been proven. In 1995, Russian cosmonaut Sergei Avdyev spent 747 consecutive days aboard the Mir space station. When he returned to Earth, something remarkable had happened. He had traveled 0.02 seconds into the future. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much, but here's why it matters. This proves that time travel is real. The phenomenon is called time dilation. Because Avdyev was moving at approximately 17,000 miles per hour while orbiting Earth, time moved slightly slower for him than for people on the ground. When he returned, he had effectively jumped 0.02 seconds into the future. This isn't science fiction or theory. This is documented, measurable fact. Astronauts who spend time in space age slightly slower than people on Earth. The difference is tiny, but it's real. But here's where it gets interesting. If time dilation works at orbital speeds, imagine what happens at speeds closer to the speed of light. According to relativistic physics, if you could travel at 99.9% the speed of light for what feels like 1 year to you when you return to Earth, decades or even centuries could have passed. This means that with sufficient technology, traveling to the future isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Some theorists believe that this is exactly what advanced civilizations might do. Want to see what humanity is like in 500 years? Just build a ship that can travel fast enough, take a round trip, and when you come back, you'll have effectively traveled through time. The Russian space program has documented these time dilation effects extensively. Cosmonauts who have spent extended periods in space have gained measurable fractions of seconds compared to Earth time. While 0.02 seconds might not seem significant, it proves the fundamental principle: time is not fixed. It's relative. It can be stretched, compressed, and manipulated. And if we can do this with current technology, imagine what might be possible with technology 100, 500, or 1,000 years more advanced than what we have today. Story 7. The Philadelphia Experiment. This is the story I mentioned at the beginning, the one that changes everything, and I need you to pay close attention because this isn't just some internet rumor. This is documented military history that the government has never fully explained. In October 1943, the U.S. Navy allegedly conducted an experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The goal was to make the USS Eldridge, a naval destroyer, invisible to enemy radar using electromagnetic fields. According to witnesses, something went terribly wrong. The ship didn't just become invisible to radar. It allegedly became invisible to the naked eye and then completely vanished from Philadelphia, reappearing at Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, over 200 miles away, before returning to Philadelphia. Crew members reported horrifying effects. Some were allegedly fused into the metal structure of the ship. Others burst into flames. Several went insane. Some reportedly became invisible themselves and could never fully reappear. The Navy has officially denied that any such experiment took place. But here's what we know for certain. There was a USS Eldridge. It was commissioned in 1943. And there are official records of degaussing experiments, using electromagnetic fields to make ships invisible to magnetic mines. Several men who claimed to be crew members came forward over the years. The most famous was Al Bielek, who we discussed earlier. But there were others. Carl Allen, who wrote detailed letters to astronomer Morris Jessup describing the experiment. Multiple sailors who reported strange occurrences aboard the ship. What makes this story so compelling is the consistency of the accounts, despite them coming from different sources who had no contact with each other. And here's something that's verifiable. Morris Jessup, the astronomer who began investigating the Philadelphia experiment after receiving Allen's letters, died under mysterious circumstances in 1959. Official reports say suicide, but investigators found peculiarities at the scene that raised questions. Some theorists believe that the Philadelphia experiment wasn't trying to achieve invisibility at all. It was actually an attempt at teleportation or time travel, based on unified field theories that Einstein had been working on. If that's true, and if the experiment worked even partially, it means the US government created time travel technology in 1943. That's over 80 years ago. Think about what technology has advanced in 80 years. If they had basic time travel in 1943, what do they have now? The official military records for the USS Eldridge are heavily redacted. Multiple Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed over the decades, and each time, large portions of the documents are blacked out for national security reasons. What are they hiding? And why, if nothing happened, would documents from 1943 still pose a national security risk today? Story 8. John Titor, the most famous time traveler. Between November 2000 and March 2001, someone claiming to be a time traveler from 2036 posted on several internet forums. He called himself John Titor, and his posts became the most famous time travel story in internet history. Titor claimed he was a soldier sent back in time to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer from 1975. He said this computer had special capabilities that were needed to debug legacy computer systems in the future. Here's what makes Titor's story fascinating. Years after his posts, IBM engineers confirmed that the IBM 5100 did indeed have special hidden functions that weren't publicly documented until years later. How did Titor know this? Titor posted detailed schematics of his time machine. He described how it worked using rotating black holes to create a temporal distortion field. Physicists who examined his diagrams noted that while they couldn't confirm it would work, the physics wasn't obviously wrong. It was based on legitimate theories about rotating black holes and frame-dragging effects. He made predictions about future events. Some came true, many didn't. Titor explained that time travel creates divergent timelines, so his future wouldn't necessarily match ours exactly. This conveniently explained away failed predictions, but it's also consistent with some interpretations of quantum mechanics. Titor described a future where the United States had undergone a civil war starting in 2004, leading to a fractured nation. He talked about World War III in 2015, which obviously didn't happen in our timeline. He described the year 2036 as a post-apocalyptic world that was slowly rebuilding. But here's what's really interesting. Titor's descriptions of why society collapsed focused on civil liberties being eroded, surveillance states being created, and society becoming divided beyond repair. Looking at our current world, his warnings seem eerily prescient, even if his specific timeline was off. Titor vanished from the forums in March 2001, claiming he was returning to his own time. He said his final post would be on March 24, 2001, and after that date, he never posted again. Investigators have tried to identify who John Titor really was. Some believe they've tracked him down to a family in Florida, but nothing has been proven. The mystery remains. What's undeniable is that Titor knew things he shouldn't have known. The IBM 5100 capabilities. Details about CERN's research into miniature black holes, which was just beginning in 2000. Descriptions of technology that didn't exist yet but has since been developed. Was John Titor really a time traveler, or was he an incredibly knowledgeable physicist who created an elaborate online persona? We may never know. But his story has inspired countless people to think about time travel as not just science fiction, but as a real possibility that might be closer than we think. Story 9, The Man from 3000 with Proof. In August 2017, a man appeared in a small town in Wyoming claiming to be from the year 3000. What makes this story different from others is what he brought with him, actual physical evidence. The man, who called himself Denton, was found wandering along a highway by local police. He was confused, disoriented, and kept insisting he was from the future. Standard procedure for what seemed like a mental health crisis. But Denton had items with him that changed everything. In his backpack, officers found what appeared to be a small electronic device. It was about the size of a smartphone, but made of a material that felt warm to the touch and seemed to have no visible seams or ports. When they tried to examine it, the device activated, projecting a three-dimensional hologram into the air. The hologram showed what appeared to be star charts, but the constellations were in positions that didn't match our current sky. Astronomers who later examined the images noted that the stellar positions seemed consistent with where stars would be approximately 1,000 years in the future, accounting for stellar drift. Denton also had a small metallic card that he claimed was a form of identification from his time. When researchers examined the card under microscopes, they found that it contained layered nanostructures beyond our current manufacturing capabilities. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Within 24 hours of Denton's arrest, federal agents arrived and took custody of both him and all the items he had with him. Local police were ordered to turn over all documentation of the incident. One of the officers who had been first on the scene later reported that before the agents took Denton away, he managed to whisper something, "Tell them about the cure." November 2024, make them remember. The officer had no idea what this meant, but he documented it in his personal notes. Denton and his devices were never seen again. The official report states that he was transported to a federal medical facility for psychiatric evaluation, but when independent researchers tried to follow up, they found no record of him ever being admitted anywhere. The local police station's security footage from that night mysteriously corrupted. The only evidence that Denton existed at all is the testimony of the officers who encountered him, and a few photographs that one officer took on his personal phone before being ordered to delete them. He deleted them from his phone, but had already backed them up to a cloud service that wasn't synced yet. Those photographs still circulate on conspiracy forums. They show the holographic projection and the mysterious metallic card. Experts who have analyzed the images say that if they're fakes, they're incredibly sophisticated ones. And what was the cure he mentioned for November 2024? We may never know the full truth, but this case remains one of the most compelling because of the physical evidence that briefly existed before disappearing into government custody. Story 10. The woman who couldn't stop traveling through time. In 2009, a woman named Linda began experiencing something that doctors couldn't explain. Without warning, she would suddenly find herself in different time periods, witnessing events from the past and future as if she were actually there. At first, Linda thought she was having vivid dreams or hallucinations. She sought help from psychiatrists, neurologists, and even specialists in sleep disorders. But every test came back normal. Her brain function was completely healthy. There was no evidence of seizures, no signs of mental illness, and no explanation for what was happening to her. What made Linda's case extraordinary was the specificity of her experiences. When she traveled to the past, she could describe locations, events, and details that she had no way of knowing. Researchers who worked with her documented dozens of instances where she provided historical information that was later verified through historical records she had never accessed. For example, she described a fire at a specific factory in Detroit in 1923, giving details about the building's layout, the names of workers who died, and even the weather that day. When researchers checked historical archives, everything matched perfectly. But these were obscure details from a minor historical event that hadn't been widely documented. Even more disturbing were her visions of the future. Linda described events that hadn't happened yet with the same clarity and detail. She talked about natural disasters, political events, and technological developments. Here's what makes this case genuinely unsettling. Several of Linda's future predictions have come true. She predicted a major earthquake in a specific region down to the month and year. She described a political scandal involving a public figure that seemed absurd at the time, but was exposed exactly as she described it 2 years later. Medical researchers studied Linda extensively. They documented her experiences, performed brain scans during her time travel episodes, and tried to find patterns that might explain what was happening. During these episodes, her brain activity showed unusual patterns in regions associated with memory formation and spatial awareness, but nothing that conclusively explained her experiences. Linda described the sensation as feeling like reality was shifting around her. One moment she would be in her living room, and the next, she'd be standing on a street corner in 1890s New York or in a laboratory in the year 257. She could see, hear, and sometimes even smell her surroundings, but she couldn't interact with anything or anyone. She was an observer, watching events unfold. The episodes typically lasted between 5 minutes and an hour. Afterward, Linda would return to her present time, often disoriented and exhausted. By 2015, Linda's episodes had become more frequent and more intense. She reported seeing timelines that seemed to branch and diverge, multiple possible futures existing simultaneously. She described witnessing the same events play out differently, as if reality itself was fluid and changeable. Then, in late 2015, Linda vanished. She went to bed one night and never woke up. Her house was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry or struggle. She simply ceased to exist in our timeline. Some theorists believe that Linda's condition wasn't a medical anomaly at all. It was a symptom of being unstuck in time, similar to concepts explored in theoretical physics. They suggest that whatever was happening to her eventually became permanent, pulling her completely out of our timeline. Others believe she was naturally sensitive to temporal fluctuations and could perceive things that others couldn't, essentially seeing the quantum nature of reality where multiple timelines exist simultaneously. Whatever the truth, Linda's case remains one of the most documented and most mysterious examples of potential time travel in modern history. Story 11. The Artist Who Painted the Future. In the 1960s and 70s, a relatively unknown artist named Paul Amadeus Dyanak created a series of paintings that he called Memories of the Valley of Roses. The paintings depicted futuristic cities, advanced technology, and scenes that seemed to come from centuries in the future. But here's what makes this interesting. Dyanak didn't claim to have imagined these scenes. He claimed to have lived them. According to his journals, in 1921, Dyanak fell into a coma that lasted for 1 year. During that time, he claimed his consciousness traveled to the year 3906, where he lived as a man named Andreas Northam in a future civilization. When he woke from his coma, Dyanak began writing down everything he had experienced. He filled thousands of pages with detailed descriptions of future society, technology, culture, and history spanning from our time to nearly 2,000 years in the future. In his writings, Dyanak described several things that didn't exist in the 1920s but do now. Global communications networks that sound remarkably like the internet, devices that people carry that can access all human knowledge, smartphones, artificial organs, and technology that sounds very similar to virtual reality. He also described darker periods in humanity's future, including what he called the period of turmoil, from 2000 to 2300, where humanity nearly destroyed itself through wars and environmental catastrophe. But according to Dyanak, humanity survived and eventually created a utopian civilization where war, poverty, and disease had been eliminated. He described this future in incredible detail: their government systems, their philosophy, their technology, and their understanding of consciousness and reality. What's remarkable is that some of Dyanak's memories included scientific concepts that weren't known in the 1920s. He wrote about quantum mechanics before it was fully developed. He described genetic engineering decades before DNA was understood. He even wrote about concepts similar to dark matter and dark energy. Skeptics argue that Dyanak was simply a visionary thinker whose ideas happened to align with later discoveries. But the specificity and consistency of his visions are difficult to dismiss entirely. Dyanak's paintings, which still exist in a private collection, show cities with architecture that seems both alien and familiar. Engineers who have examined the paintings note that the structures depicted would actually be functional. They're not just fantasy art, but designs that solve real engineering challenges. Dyanak died in 1924, just 3 years after his awakening from the coma. Before his death, he gave his manuscripts to his friend George Papachatzis, who later translated and published them. The work has remained largely obscure, known mainly in academic circles interested in future studies and consciousness research. But those who have studied Dyanak's writings are struck by their coherence and detail. This wasn't the rambling of someone mentally unstable, but a systematic and logical description of a possible future. Was Dyanak's consciousness really displaced through time during his coma? Did he glimpse an actual future timeline? Or was he experiencing some kind of expanded consciousness that allowed him to intuit future developments? We may never know, but his paintings and writings remain as testament to either the most elaborate imagination of the 20th century or a genuine glimpse into humanity's distant future. Story 12, The Time Slip. At Bold Street, Liverpool, England has a street called Bold Street that has become famous in paranormal circles for something called time slips, moments when people reportedly step briefly into the past. The most famous case occurred in 1996 when a police officer named Frank was shopping with his wife. They split up, with his wife going into a bookstore while Frank went to look for a specific music CD. As Frank walked down Bold Street, he noticed the traffic had changed. The modern cars were gone, replaced by vehicles from the 1950s. The storefronts looked different, older, with different names. People's clothing had changed to styles from decades past. Confused, Frank walked into what should have been a bookstore called Waterstones. But the sign now read Crips, and inside it was completely different. Smaller, with different products, a different layout, and staff dressed in 1950s attire. Frank stood there, shocked, as a young woman in 1950s clothing bumped into him. She looked at him strangely, presumably because he was wearing modern clothing in what appeared to be 1950s Liverpool. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything shifted back to normal. Modern cars filled the street. Frank was back in 1996. He immediately went to find his wife and told her what happened. Initially skeptical, she noted that Frank was clearly shaken, not the kind of person prone to flights of fancy, especially as a police officer trained in observation and reporting. What makes this story compelling is that Frank isn't the only one. Dozens of people have reported similar experiences on Bold Street. They describe walking down the street and suddenly finding themselves in a different era, usually the 1950s or 60s, before being returned to the present. Some report seeing the same specific stores or landmarks. There's consistency in the descriptions despite them coming from people who don't know each other and reported their experiences years apart. Researchers have investigated Bold Street extensively. Some theories suggest there might be some kind of geological or electromagnetic anomaly in the area that could affect perception or even create temporal distortions. Others believe that time might not be as linear as we think, that past, present, and future exist simultaneously, and under certain conditions, people can briefly perceive different time periods. The most scientific explanation suggests that these experiences might be a form of collective memory or psychic imprinting, that significant historical events can somehow record themselves into a location, and sensitive individuals might be able to perceive these recordings. But none of these explanations fully account for the detailed consistency of the reports, the physical sensations people describe, or the fact that multiple witnesses have sometimes experienced the same time slip together. Bold Street has become something of a destination for people interested in time anomalies. Some visit hoping to experience a time slip themselves. A few have reported success, though of course these accounts are difficult to verify. What we do know is that something unusual happens on Bold Street with enough regularity that it's become documented phenomenon. Whether it's genuine time slips or something else entirely, the mystery remains unsolved. Story 13. The CHRONOVISOR, the Vatican's secret time machine. And it involves the Vatican, which makes it even more intriguing. Father Pellegrino Ernetti was a Benedictine monk, a respected scientist, and an expert in archaic music. In the 1960s, he made an astounding claim. He had been part of a team that created a device called the CHRONOVISOR, a machine that could view events from the past. According to Ernetti, the device worked by detecting and reconstructing electromagnetic radiation that had been left behind by past events. Essentially, it could tune into the echoes of history and display them as images. Ernetti claimed that he and his team, which allegedly included Nobel Prize-winning physicist Enrico Fermi, had used the CHRONOVISOR to witness historical events. He said they had watched the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, seen Napoleon giving speeches, and even witnessed the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He described the crucifixion in detail, claiming he had seen it through the CHRONOVISOR on the evening of April 7th in the year 33 AD. He even provided a photograph that he said was taken from the device's screen, an image of Christ's face during the crucifixion. When the photograph was published, it caused a sensation. But skeptics quickly pointed out that the image looked suspiciously similar to a statue of Christ that existed in a church in Umbria, Italy. Ernetti never adequately explained this similarity. Despite intense pressure and criticism, Ernetti maintained his story until his death in 1994. On his deathbed, he reportedly reaffirmed that the CHRONOVISOR was real, though he recanted the photograph, admitting it was a fake he had created to satisfy people who demanded proof. But here's what's interesting. Ernetti insisted the device itself was real. He said the Vatican had taken possession of it because of the dangerous implications of being able to view any moment in history. Think about it. Such a device would eliminate all privacy, reveal all secrets, and could be used to manipulate historical understanding. If the CHRONOVISOR was real, the Vatican would have good reason to hide it. It could confirm or deny religious events, expose historical secrets, and fundamentally change our understanding of the past. Some researchers claim that similar technology has been theorized by quantum physicists. If information about past events is somehow encoded in the quantum state of the universe, it might theoretically be possible to reconstruct and view those events. Father Brune, a French priest who knew Ernetti, stated that Ernetti had confessed to him that the device was real and that it had been hidden away by the Vatican to prevent its misuse. True or not, the CHRONOVISOR story raises fascinating questions about whether viewing the past might be possible through technology we don't yet understand. And if it is possible, what would that mean for privacy, history, and our understanding of time itself? Story 14. The Boy Who Remembered the Battle of ISGANDRUM? Reincarnation stories are often dismissed as either fantasy or false memory, but this case is different. It involves specific, verifiable details that a young child had no way of knowing. In 1963, a 5-year-old boy named Kenneth in England began having vivid nightmares. But these weren't typical childhood bad dreams. Kenneth would wake up screaming, describing battle scenes in incredible detail, the smell of gunpowder, the sound of cannons, the faces of dying soldiers. His parents were concerned, but thought it would pass. Instead, it got worse. Kenneth began speaking words in what sounded like an ancient language during his episodes. He would draw pictures of battles, showing formations and military tactics that seemed far too sophisticated for a 5-year-old. Desperate for help, Kenneth's parents took him to a psychiatrist, Dr. Arthur Girdham. What happened next would become one of the most studied cases of apparent past life memory in modern psychology. Under careful questioning, never under hypnosis, which Dr. Gurdam felt could contaminate memories, Kenneth described life as a soldier in the 12th century during the Albigensian Crusade in southern France. He described specific battles, named commanders, described the layout of fortifications, and even provided details about daily life in that time period. Dr. Gurdam was initially skeptical, but he began investigating Kenneth's claims. What he found was shocking. Many of the details Kenneth provided were accurate, but they came from obscure historical records that even specialists in medieval history would have struggled to access. Kenneth described a specific battle at a place he called ISGANDRUM. Historians initially said no such place existed, but further research revealed a small fortress in southern France that had indeed been called ISGANDRUM in the 12th century, a detail found only in obscure Latin texts that Kenneth couldn't possibly have read. He named specific knights and soldiers, described their armor and weapons, and even corrected historical texts that Dr. Gurdam showed him, pointing out errors that were later confirmed through additional research. The most disturbing aspect was Kenneth's emotional response to these memories. He would cry real tears describing the death of his friends in battle. He showed signs of genuine trauma when recalling certain events. This wasn't a child playing pretend. This was someone reliving actual traumatic experiences. As Kenneth grew older, the memories began to fade, as often happens in cases of apparent past life memory. By age 12, they had mostly disappeared, leaving Kenneth with only vague recollections of his vivid childhood experiences. Dr. Gurdam published his findings in several academic papers and books. While many colleagues remained skeptical, others noted that the case presented evidence difficult to explain through conventional means. Skeptics argue that Kenneth might have been exposed to historical information through books or media that he consciously forgot, but unconsciously remembered. But this explanation struggles to account for the obscure details and the corrections of accepted historical understanding. Was Kenneth genuinely remembering a past life? If so, it suggests that consciousness might not be bound by a single lifespan, that memories and experiences could somehow transfer across time through reincarnation. And if consciousness can move forward through time from past lives to present ones, who's to say it can't also move in other directions? Perhaps time travel isn't about physically moving through time, but about consciousness accessing different points in the temporal continuum. Story 15. The Mathematician Who Proved Time Travel is Possible. For our final story, we're going to talk about someone who isn't claiming to have time traveled, but rather someone who proved mathematically that time travel is not only possible, it's inevitable. Dr. Ronald Mallett is a theoretical physicist and professor emeritus at the University of Connecticut. Unlike the other stories we've discussed, Mallett's work is peer-reviewed, published in scientific journals, and taken seriously by the physics community. Mallett became obsessed with time travel as a child after his father died. He dreamed of building a time machine to go back and save his father. This childhood dream drove him to become a physicist, and he spent his entire career working on the mathematics of time travel. Here's what makes Mallett's work revolutionary. He's not just theorizing. He's designed an actual device that, according to his calculations, should be able to create a closed time-like curve, essentially a loop in time. His design uses rotating beams of light to create intense gravitational fields that could theoretically warp space-time enough to allow backward time travel. The math is based on Einstein's general relativity, the same equations that have been proven correct time and time again. In 2000, Mallett published his equations in the journal Physics Letters A. The physics community took notice. While many physicists raised valid concerns about the practical challenges of building such a device, no one could find fundamental flaws in his mathematics. The device would require enormous amounts of energy, more than we can currently generate. It would also have limitations. According to Mallett's equations, you couldn't travel back to a time before the device was first turned on. So if we build a time machine in 2025, we could only travel back to 2025, not to 1950. But here's the mind-bending implication. If Mallett's equations are correct, then somewhere in the future, humanity or some other civilization will build a working time machine. And once they do, they could send information or possibly even matter back to any point after the machine was activated. This means that the moment we successfully create the first time machine, we might immediately start receiving visitors or messages from the future, from all points in the future after that moment. Some physicists have suggested that this might be why we haven't encountered time travelers yet. We haven't built the first machine that would serve as an anchor point for future time travel. Mallett's work has received attention from media around the world. He's given TED Talks, been featured in documentaries, and written a book about his quest to build a time machine. While there are still significant technical challenges to overcome, Mallett has demonstrated that time travel backward in time is not just science fiction. It's theoretically possible within the known laws of physics. And here's something that should give you chills. If it's theoretically possible, and if our civilization or any advanced civilization eventually achieves it, then time travelers already exist. They're already here, moving through time, perhaps observing us right now, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves or change something crucial. The future is already reaching back into the present. We just haven't detected it yet. So, there you have it. 15 shocking stories of time travelers that challenge everything we think we know about reality. From the man in Nebraska who vanished after making disturbing predictions, to the physicist working right now to build a real-time machine, these stories suggest that time travel isn't just possible. It might already be happening. Some of these stories might be hoaxes. Some might be misunderstandings or mental illness. But not all of them can be so easily dismissed. The evidence in some cases is too compelling, too specific, too consistent with scientific understanding. And here's what really should concern you. If even one of these stories is real, if even one person has genuinely traveled through time, then everything changes. It means our understanding of reality is fundamentally incomplete. It means the past might not be fixed. It means the future might already be influencing the present. Think about that the next time you experience déjà vu, the next time you have a dream that seems too real, the next time you see someone on the street who looks like they don't quite belong in this time period. Time travelers might not announce themselves. They might blend in, observe, and wait. They might be changing small things, adjusting the timeline in subtle ways we'd never notice. Or maybe you're the time traveler and you just don't remember it yet. Before you go, I need you to do something for me. First, smash that like button if these stories blew your mind. Second, subscribe and hit the notification bell because we're diving deep into more mysteries that will challenge everything you believe about reality. And finally, I want you to comment below. Have you ever experienced something that felt like a time slip? Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in this time period? Or do you have a time travel story of your own? Share your experiences in the comments. You never know, your story might be featured in our next video. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and remember, time might not be as fixed as we think it is. The past could still be changing, and the future might be trying to warn us right now. I'll see you in the next video. Or maybe I already have, and you just don't remember it yet.